Sanctum. Okay. How's that being? Might just cut me out. The history. I'll just read this. Founding partners. It's not just what's currently going on, the reset, the deep state, chaos, and the New World Order by Freemasons. The Illuminati control the world. Okay, mass genocide. Oh. Underground war. The blog. Website. Secret underground bases. I knew this a long time ago. Called deep state military bases. As we go underground our daily routines, there's a war being fought underground involving brave militaries around the world with deep state and possibly aliens. Many of us have read and heard about the deep state, which the author writes about extensively. For those of you not familiar with the deep state, check out the other post. In a nutshell, the deep state is an evil organisation known as the Illuminati, or the Berg Group. The deep state controls all major networks, Hollywood, politics and banking. Deep state has been around for centuries. Whistleblowers, book writers have been exposing this cult for years. Because the internet and more private social media platforms, it quotes which ones, searching for the truth seekers are able to share information in videos and files. What is the deep state? Druids. So you can get rid of nature demons. On the internet. So this is going to be an ordinary history, you might have gone wrong, but he's becoming organised, as I found these already a while ago, but I also found it on the blog, which I'm going to. And if you don't want to know, it's up to you. But this is important to get information up. The Druids, the history. You don't deal with the flesh and blood. It's still part of it. You use the technology to target and cause harm. You know, extreme harm. everything they ordered. The deep people at the top of the pyramid can material 300, with a small amount of people around them that run everything. Though the committee 300, you'll have the puppets and the actors, news, media, banks, and politicians, Hollywood actors are nothing more than puppets used to brainwash the people of the world and believing there was a racism, hatred, anger amongst people. Bloodlines, which there's 30 family bloodlines, by the way, in the world, within the deep state, go back centuries, as far back as ancient Egypt and beyond. All CNI are pyramids in USA currency, and the ancestry. High members of the deep state believe they are descendants of Cain from biblical times. The story of Cain and Abel is one of the sibling rivalry and murder. It's shocking to realise that there are only one generation between the Bible's story of creation and the first homicide. Mankind's descent into sinfulness was the first and severe. Cain and Abel were brothers. They each bring God a sacrifice. When God shows disappointment in Cain's sacrifice and pleasure in Abel's, Cain kills Abel with a stone. God confronts Cain about murdering his brother. Cain lies about it and expels him to the land of Nod, east of Eden. The deep state underground battles between the militaries of the world and the evil deep state cabal are not just over politics, it is truly good versus evil. The deep state makes money through the Federal Reserve Bank, stock market manipulation, planned wars, and child trafficking, allegedly afterward. The Rockefeller and Rothschild families are notorious for their money worth trillions and satanic, demonic Illuminati practices, and these two things, along with the Vatican, are at the high deep state levels. Check out another post Federal Reserve Bank and Vatican. I already went into that before. Now it's alleged that the Rockefellers and Rothschilds families were behind for certain other things. They're behind everything. Remember the George Ford situation? That was allegedly something that happened. I can't quote on this format on the channel. George Ford was a 33-level Mason. The entire world was engaged over a black man's killing, killed by a cop. Thousands of people killed unfortunately every day, regardless of colour. The George Ford death was a, you know what, H. Just let it H, put it that way. It was planned to cause riots and their plan failed. The only riots were paid Antifa mob. The George Ford frenzy was released by news media again, completed and planted bricks on every corner around the world. I'm on with the beer men and Antifa. That's a video, I can't play that one right now. Deep state wants power control, which is why the people are forced to live paycheck to paycheck and bring blind to what's really, going on. So there's a list who controls world events behind the scenes. I'm going to try and get the website, Steve Water. I'm going to try the website up. in the UK. What you hear in the video known as the Secret Covenant Illuminati Service in the Web 2022. Sorry, correction, 2002. The video is about the deep state was sent from a broken email address. Now, truth seekers researchers believe the Secret Covenant was written by a member of the Illuminati, was trying to warn the people and possibly escape the occult. Bloodlines within the deep state go back centuries, far as I read about that just now. Illuminati and the Freemasons, but first of all, let's just check if it's the same video. Audio. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to show you that your world. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no turning back. You can take the pill, wake up in bed and believe whatever you want to believe. Or you take the pill, how deep the rabbit hole goes. I'm only offering you the truth, nothing more. What more than 50 years ago? It was done by Myron Fagan in 1967. This recording is off the book Pawns in the Game.
Other names. In the United States, immediately after World War I, they called the Council on Foreign Relations, commonly referred to as the CFR. And CFR is actually the Illuminati in the United States. And its hierarchy the masterminds in control of the CFR, to a very great extent, are the descendants of the original Illuminati conspirators. But to conceal that fact, most of them changed their original family names to American-sounding names. For example, the twins Dillon, Clarence and Douglas Dillon, one Secretary of the U.S. Treasury Department, is Lebowski. I'll come back to all this later. There is a similar establishment of the Illuminati in England, operating under the name of the British Institute of International Affairs. There are similar secret Illuminati organizations in France, Germany, and other nations operating under different names. And all these organizations, including the CFR, continuously set up numerous subsidiary or front organizations that are infiltrated into every phase of the various nations' affairs. But at all times, the operations of these organizations were and are masterminded and controlled by the internationalist bankers, who in turn were and are controlled by the Rothschilds. One branch of the Rothschild family had financed Napoleon. Another branch of the Rothschilds, both branches, the real masterminds of the Illuminati, financed Britain, Germany, and other nations in the Napoleonic Wars. Immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, the Illuminati assumed that all the nations were so destitute and so weary of wars that they'd be glad for any solution. So the Rothschild stooges set up what they called the Congress in Vienna. And at that meeting, they tried to create the first League of Nations, their first attempted one world government, on the theory that all the crowned heads of the European governments were so deeply in debt to them that they would willingly or unwillingly serve as their stooges. But the Tsar of Russia caught the stench of the plot and completely torpedoed it. The enraged Nathan Rothschild, then the head of that dynasty, vowed that someday he or his descendants would destroy the Tsar and his entire family. And his descendants did accomplish that very threat in 1917. At this point, bear in mind that the Illuminati was not set up to operate on a short-range basis. Normally, a conspirator of any type enters into a conspiracy with the expectation of achieving an objective during his own lifetime. But that was not the case with the Illuminati. True, they hoped to accomplish their objective during their lifetime. But, paraphrasing, the show must go on. The Illuminati operates on the very long-range basis. Whether it will take scores of years or even centuries, they have dedicated their descendants to keep the plot boiling until, they hope, the conspiracy is achieved. Now let's go back to the birth of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, teaching in Ingolstadt University when he defected from Christianity to embrace the Luciferian conspiracy. It was in 1770 that the professional moneylenders, the then recently organized House of Rothschild, retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols of Zionism, which from the outset was designed to give the synagogue of Satan, so named by Jesus Christ, ultimate world domination. So they proposed the Luciferian ideology would remain of the human race after the final socialism by use day with all this make Illuminati. Plan of all existing governments and religions. That object by the fighting masses of people whom he termed goyim, for human capital, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, social, economic, and other issues. The very conditions we have in our country today. Sides were then armed and incidents provided which would cause them to fight and weaken themselves and gradually destroy national governments and religious institutions. Again, I say, the very conditions in the world today. Now, just why did the conspirators choose the word Illuminati for their satanic organization? Weishaupt himself said the word derived from Lucifer, and means so exact belonging to well-bred families with international leanings, and recommend them for special training in international trainings were to be provided by granting scholarships those selected by the Illuminists. That gives you an idea of what a Rhodes Scholarship means. It means indoctrination into accepting the idea that only a one-world government can put an end to recurring wars and strife. That's how the United Nations was sold to the American people. All such scholars were to be first persuaded and then convinced that men of special talent and brains have the right to rule those less gifted, on the ground that the masses don't know what is best for them physically, mentally, and spiritually. Number 3, all influential people trapped into coming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the students who had been specially educated and trained, were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists, so they would advise the top executives to adopt policies which would, in the long run, serve the secret plans of the Illuminati one-world conspiracy and bring about the destruction of the governments and religions that were elected or appointed to serve. Number 4, perhaps the most vital directive in Weishaupt's Press, at that time the only mass communications media to distribute information to the so that all news and information could be the masses that a one-world government is the only solution to our many and varied problems. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communication? I'll tell you, practically all the movie lots in Hollywood is owned by demoms, Kuhn Loeb and Company, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist bankers. All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled by those same international bankers. The same is true of every chain of metropolitan magazines, also of the press wire services, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed heads of all those media are merely the fronts for the internationalist bankers, who in turn compose the hierarchy of the CFR, today's Illuminati in America. Now, can you understand why the Pentagon's press agent Sylvester so blatantly proclaimed that the government has the right to lie to the people? What he really meant was that our CFR-controlled government had the power to lie to and be believed by the brainwashed American people. And again, go back to the first days of the Illuminati. Because Britain and France were the two greatest world powers in the late years of the 18th century, Weishaupt ordered the Illuminati to foment colonial wars, including our Revolutionary War, to weaken the British Empire and organize the French Revolution to destroy the French Empire. He scheduled the French Revolution to start in 1789. However, in 1784, a true act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the Illuminati, and that evidence could have saved France. The French government hadn't refused to believe it. Here is that act of God. It was in 1874 that Weishaupt orders French Revolution. A German writer named Zwack put it into form. It contained the entire Illuminati story and Weishaupt's plans. A copy of this book was sent to the Illuminists in France, headed by Robespierre, who Weishaupt had delegated to foment the French Revolution. The courier was struck and killed by lightning as he rode to Ralston on his way from Frankfurt to Paris. The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned them over to the proper authorities. After careful study of plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raid Weishaupt's organized lodges of the Grand Orient and the homes of his most influential associates. All of the additional evidence thus discovered convinced the authorities that the documents were genuine copies of the conspiracy by which the Illuminati tend to use wars and establishment of a one-world government, the powers of which they, headed by the Rothschilds, intended to usurp as soon as it was established. Exactly in line with the United Nations plot of today. In 17 the title of that publication is The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Copies of entire were sent to all heads of church and state in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, Illuminati became a dirty word, and it went underground. At the same time, Weishaupt ordered Illuminists to infiltrate into the lodges of Blue Masonry and form their own secret societies within all secret societies. Only Masons who proved themselves internationalists and those whose conduct proved they had defected from God were initiated into the Illuminati. Thenceforth, the conspirators donned the cloak of philanthropy and humanitarianism to conceal their Edinburgh University and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Robeson did not fall for the lie that the objective of the Illuminati was to create a benevolent dictatorship, but he kept his research to himself so well that he was entrusted with a copy of Weishaupt's revised conspiracy for studies and keeping. Anyway, because the heads of state and church in France were deluded into ignoring the warnings given them, the revolution broke out in 1789 as scheduled by Weishaupt. In order to alert other governments to their danger, in 1798, Robeson destroy all governments and religions. Exactly as our American people have been ignoring all warnings about the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. Now here is something that will stun and very likely outrage many who hear this. But there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of Weishaupt. Jefferson was one of Weishaupt's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robeson warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati had infiltrated into their lodges. And on July 19, 1789, David Papin, president of Harvard University, issued the same warning to the graduating class and lectured them on the influence Illuminism was acquiring on American politics and religion. And to top it off, John Quincy Adams, who had organized the New England Masonic Lodges, issued his warnings. He wrote 3 letters to Colonel William L. Stone, a top Mason, in which he exposed how Jefferson was using Masonic lodges for subversive, Illuministic purposes. Those 3 letters are at this very time in Rittenberg Square Library in Philadelphia. In 1826, one Captain William Morgan decided it was his duty to inform all Masons and the general public what the full truth was regarding the Illuminati, their secret plans and intended objectives. Also reveal the identities of the masterminds of the conspiracy. The Illuminati promptly tried Morgan in absentia and convicted him of treason. They ordered one Richard Howard, an English Illuminist, to carry out their sentence of execution as a traitor. Morgan was warned and he tried to escape to Canada, but Howard caught up with him near the border, near the Niagara Gorge to be exact, where he murdered him. This was verified in a sworn statement made in New York by one Avery Allen to the effect that he heard Howard render his report of the execution to a meeting of Knights Templars in St. John's Hall, New York. He also told how arrangements had been made to ship Howard back to England. That Allen affidavit is on record in New York City archives. Very few Masons and very few of the general public know that general disapproval over that incident of murder caused approximately half of all the Masons in the northern jurisdiction of the United States to secede. Copies of the minutes of the meeting discuss that matter are still in existence in safe hands, and that all that secrecy emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati to prevent such terrible events of history from being taught in our schools. The Rothschilds decided that to keep the plot alive, they'd have to do it by heightening their control of the money systems of the European nations. Earlier, by a ruse, the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo had been falsified. Rothschild had spread a story that Napoleon had won that had precipitated a terrific panic on the stock market in England. All stocks had plummeted down to practically zero, and Nathan Rothschild bought all the stocks for virtually a penny on its dollar values. That gave him complete control of the economy of Britain and virtually all Europe. So immediately after that Congress in Vienna had boomeranged, Rothschild forced Britain to set up a new Bank of England, which he absolutely controlled. Exactly as later, through Jacob Schiff, he engineered our own Federal Reserve Act, which gave the House of Rothschild a secret control of the economy in the United States. Weishaupt died in 1830. But prior to his death, he prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which, under various aliases, was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations and groups by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rusk, McNamara, Fulbright, etc. as prime examples. In addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Karl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the Antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy could use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps, so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other, and particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. The work Ritter started was continued after his death and completed by the German so-called philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, who founded Nietzscheism. This Nietzscheism was later developed into fascism and then into Nazism, and was used to foment World Wars I and II. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, Pike, worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 Supreme Councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the third in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince at Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and religions. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political Zionists. And here let it be noted that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, and other internationalist bankers, and that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish internationalist bankers at all. That slaughter was necessary in order to create worldwide hatred of the German people and thus bring about the war against them. In short, this Second World War was to be fought to destroy Nazism and to increase the power of political Zionism so that the State of Israel could be established in Palestine. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies the agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to Mazzini on August 15, 1871. Pike stated, "Those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known." Quoting his own words, taken from the letter he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter is now catalogued in the British Museum in London, England, he said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy, but actually they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy. The headquarters of the Great Conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayer Anschelm, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschild's boy in America, died, the headquarters of the American branch has been in the Harold Pratt Building, New York, and the Rockefellers, originally protégés of Schiff, have taken over the manipulation of finances in America for the Illuminati. In the final phases of the conspiracy, the one world government will consist of the king dictator, head of the United Nations, the CFR, and a few billionaires, economists, and scientists who have proved their devotion to the great conspiracy. All others are to be integrated into a vast conglomeration of mongrelized humanity, actually slaves. Now let me show you how our federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one world takeover of the Illuminati great conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one world so-called liberal conspiracy. The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that Weishaupt and the earlier masterminds had ever overlooked the New World. As I have previously indicated, Weishaupt had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than a match for them. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched their first concrete efforts. We know that Judah Benjamin, chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, was a Rothschild agent. We also know that there were Rothschild agents planted in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet who tried to sell him into a financial dealing with the House of Rothschild. But old Abe saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it, thereby incurring the undying enmity of the Rothschilds, exactly as the Russian Tsar did when he torpedoed their first League of Nations at the Congress in Vienna. Investigation of the assassination of Lincoln revealed that the assassin, Booth, was a member of a secret conspiratorial group. Because there were a number of highly important government officials involved, the name of the group was never revealed, and it became a mystery, exactly as the assassination of Jack Kennedy still is a mystery. The ending of the Civil War destroyed, temporarily, all chances of the House of Rothschild to get a clutch on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch. But they lost no time in getting started. Shortly after the Civil War, a young immigrant who called himself Jacob H. Schiff arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money wizard, but more important, he also saw the latent Machiavellian qualities in Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschilds' London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Actually, Jacob came here to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1, important, to find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, in the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. Number 3, create minority group strife throughout the nations, particularly between whites and blacks. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, Christianity to be the chief target. Now, the vast majority of the American people think that the Federal Reserve System is a United States government-owned agency. That is positively false. All of the stock of the Federal Reserve banks is owned by the member banks, and the heads of the member banks are all members of the hierarchy of the great Illuminati conspiracy known today as the CFR. The details of that act of treason in which many traitorous so-called Americans participated are far too long for this recording. Now, if you think that those aliens and their by accident of birth American co-conspirators would be content with just the control of our money system, you're in for another very sad shock. The Federal Reserve System gave the conspirators complete control of our money system, but it in no way touched the earnings of the people, because the Constitution positively forbids what is now known as the 20% withholding tax. But the Illuminati blueprint for one-world enslavement called for the confiscation of all private property and control of individual earning powers. This, and Karl Marx stressed that feature in his blueprint, had to be accomplished by a progressive graduated income tax. As I stated, Such a tax could not lawfully be imposed upon the American people. It is succinctly and expressly forbidden by our Constitution. Thus, only an amendment to the Constitution could give the federal government such confiscatory powers. Well, that too was not an insurmountable problem for our Machiavellian plotters. The same elected leaders in both houses of Congress and the same Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who signed the infamous Federal Reserve Act into law, amended the Constitution to make the federal income tax, known as the 16th Amendment, a law of the land. Both are illegal under our Constitution. In short, the same traitors signed both betrayals, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment, into law. However, it seems that nobody ever realized that the 16th Amendment was set up to rob, and I do mean rob, the people of their earnings via the income tax provision. The plotters didn't fully use that provision until World War II, when that gray humanitarian, Franklin Roosevelt, applied a 20% withholding tax on all small wage earners and up to 90% on higher incomes. Oh, of course, he faithfully promised that it would be only for the duration of the war. But what was a promise to such a charlatan who in 1940, when he was running for his third term, kept proclaiming, "I say again and again and again that I will never send American boys to fight on foreign soil"? Remember? He was proclaiming that even as he was already preparing to plunge us into World War II by enticing the Japanese into that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor to furnish him with his excuse. And before I forget, let me remind you that another charlatan named Woodrow Wilson used exactly that same campaign slogan in 1916. His slogan was, "Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war." Exactly the same formula, exactly the same promises. But wait, as Al Jolson used to say, you ain't heard nothing yet. That 16th Amendment income tax trap was intended to confiscate, rob, the earnings only of the common herd, you and me. It was not intended to even touch huge incomes of the Illuminati gang, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Lehmans, and all the other conspirators. So together with that 16th Amendment, they created what they called the tax-free foundations. That would enable the conspirators to transform their huge wealth into such so-called foundations and avoid payment of virtually all income taxes. The excuse for it was that the earnings of those tax-free foundations would be devoted to humanitarian philanthropy. So we now have the several Rockefeller foundations, the Carnegie Endowment Fund, the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and hundreds of similar tax-free foundations. And what kind of philanthropy do these foundations support? Well, they finance all the civil rights groups that are creating all the chaos and rioting all over the country. In short, the tax-free foundation finance those who are doing the job for the Illuminati Great Conspiracy. Our CFR Illuminati-controlled federal government can grant tax-free status to all foundations and pro-red one-word outfits, such as the Fund for the Republic. But if you, or a patriotic pro-organization, is too outspokenly pro-American, they can terrify and intimidate you by finding a misplaced comma in your income tax report and by threatening you with penalties, fines, and even prison. Future historians will wonder how the American people could have been so naive and stupid as to have permitted such audaciously brazen acts of treason as the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment. Well, they were not naive and they were not stupid. The answer is they trusted the men they elected to safeguard our country and our people. And they just didn't have even an inkling about either betrayal until after each one had been accomplished. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass communications media, that kept and is keeping our people naive and stupid and unaware of the treason being committed. Now the great question is, when will the people wake up and do to our traitors of today what George Washington and our founding fathers would have done to Benedict Arnold? Actually, Benedict Arnold was a petty traitor compared to our present traitors in Washington. Now let's go back to the events that followed the rape of our Constitution by the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of the 16th Amendment. With Wilson completely under their control, the masterminds of the Great Conspiracy put in motion their next, and what they hoped would be their final steps to achieve their one-world government. The first of those steps was to be World War I. Why war? Simple. The only excuse for a one-world government is that it will supposedly ensure peace. The only thing that can make people cry for peace is war. War brings chaos, destruction, exhaustion, to winner as well as to loser. It brings economic ruin to both. Most important, it destroys the flower of the young manhood of both. To the saddened and heartbroken oldsters, the mothers and fathers, who are left with nothing but memories of their beloved sons, peace becomes worth any price. And that is the emotion upon which the conspirators depend for the success of their satanic plot. Throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1914, the world as a whole was at peace. Such wars as the Franco-Prussian, our own Civil War, the Russo-Japanese War, were what might be termed local disturbances that did not affect the rest of the world. All the great nations were prosperous. The people staunchly nationalistic and fiercely proud of their sovereignties. It was utterly unthinkable that the French and the German peoples would be willing to live under a one-world government, or the Turks and the Russians, or the Chinese and the Japanese. Even more unthinkable that a Kaiser Wilhelm, or a Franz Joseph, or a Tsar Nicholas, or any monarch would willingly and meekly surrender his throne to a one-world government. But bear in mind that the peoples in all nations are the real power, and only one thing, war, could make the peoples yearn and clamor for a peace-ensuring one-world government. But it would have to be a frightful and horribly devastating war. It could not be just a local disturbing war between two nations. It would have to be a world war. the conspirators had achieved their primary objective. All of Europe was in a state of destitution. All the peoples were war-weary, praying for peace. And the outcome was all set. It was to come as soon as the United States or the Allies. That was all set to happen immediately after Wilson's re-election. After that, there could be only one outcome: complete victory for the Allies. When Wilson was campaigning for re-election in 1916, his chief appeal was, re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war. But during that same campaign, Republican Party publicly charged that Wilson had long committed himself to throw us into the war. They charged that he would be defeated. But if re-elected, he would offer after re-election. But at that time, the American people looked upon Wilson as a God-man. Well, Wilson was re-elected. And as the schedule of the conspirators, he hurled us into the war in 1917. It was the sinking of the Lusitania, a sinking which also was prearranged. Also a God-man in the eyes of the American people. Same technique in when he did his report, the conspirators planned. Is perfectly conditioned for the one world government the great conspiracy intended, but there still would be an obstacle, the same obstacle that balked the Illuminati and Ryle at that first in Vienna peace gathering after the Napoleonic Wars. Russia would be on the winning side this time, as it was in 1814. Therefore, the Tsar would be securely on his throne. Here it is pertinent to note, under the Tsarist regime had been the one country which still hadn't made any headway. Nor the Rothschilds have been able to infiltrate the banking interests. Thus, a winning Tsar would be more difficult than ever to deal with, even if he could be enticed into a so-called League of Nations. It was a conclusion that he would never, but never go for one world government. So even before the outbreak of World War I, the conspirators had a plan in the making carried out Nathan Rothschild's vow of 1814 to destroy the Tsar and also murder all possible royal heirs to the throne. And it would have to be done before the close of the war. And the Russian Bolsheviki would be their instruments in this particular plot. From the turn of the century, the chiefs of the Bolsheviki were Nikolai Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and later Stalin. Of course, those are not the family names. Prior to the outbreak of the war, Lenin headquartered in Paris. Switzerland became his haven. Florida in New York, largely the habitat of Russian Jewish refugees. Both Trotsky were similarly whiskered and both lived well, yet neither had a regular occupation. Neither had any visible means of support, yet always had plenty of money. All those monies were solved in 1917. Right from the outset of the war, strange and mysterious goings-on were taking place in New York. Night after night, Trotsky darted comfortably in and out of ship's palatial mansion. And in the dead of those same nights, there were gangs of hoodlums of New York's Lower East Side, all of them Russian refugees at Trotsky's headquarters, and all going through some mysterious sort of training process. It was all shrouded in mystery. Nobody talked, although it did leak out that she had Trotsky's activities. Then suddenly Trotsky vanished. So did approximately 300 of his trained hoodlums. Actually, they were on the high seas in a ship chartered by Lenin and his gang, and on that ship was $20 million in gold. The $20 million shift provided to finance the Bolshevik takeover of Russia. In anticipation of Trotsky's arrival, Lenin prepared to throw a party in his Switzerland highway. Men of the very highest places in the world were to be guests at that party. Among them were the mysterious Colonel Edward Mandell House, Woodrow Wilson's mentor and palsy Walsey, and more important, Schiff's special and confidential messenger. Another of the expected guests was Warburg of the Warburg banking clan in Germany, financing the Kaiser, and whom the Kaiser had rewarded by making him chief of the secret police of Germany. In addition, there were the Rothschilds of London and Paris. Also, Litvinov, Ganovich, Stalin, who was then head of a train and bank robbing gang of bandits. He was known as the Jesse James of the Urals. And here I must remind that England and France were then long in war with Germany, and that on February 3, 1917, Wilson had broken off all diplomatic relations with Germany. Therefore, Warburg, Colonel House, the Rothschild, and all those others were enemies. But of course, Switzerland was neutral ground where enemies could meet and be friends, especially if they had some scheme in common. That Lenin party was very nearly wrecked by an unforeseen incident. The Schiff-chartered ship on its way to Switzerland was intercepted and taken into custody by a British warship. But Schiff quickly rushed orders to Wilson to order the British to release the ship intact with the Trotsky hoodlums and the gold. Wilson obeyed. He warned the British that if they refused to release the ship, the United States would not enter the war in April, as he had faithfully promised a year earlier. The British heeded the warning. Trotsky arrived in Switzerland, and the Lenin party went off as scheduled. But they still faced what ordinarily would have been the insurmountable obstacle of getting the Lenin-Trotsky band of terrorists across the border into Russia. Well, that's where Brother Warburg, chief of the German secret police, came in. He loaded all those thugs into sealed freight cars and made all the necessary arrangement for their secret entry into Russia. The rest is history. The revolution in Russia took place, and all members of the royal Romanov family were murdered. Now, my chief objective is to establish beyond even a remote doubt that communism, so-called, is an integral part of the Illuminati's great conspiracy for the enslavement of the entire world. That communism, so-called, is merely their weapon and bogeyman word to terrify the peoples of the whole world, and that the conquest of Russia and the creation of communism was in great part organized by Schiff and the other international bankers right in our own city of New York. Charlie Knickerbocker, a Hearst newspaper columnist, published an interview with John Schiff, grandson of Jacob, in which young Schiff confirmed the entire story and named the figure old Jacob contributed, $20 million. If anybody still has even a remote doubt that the entire menace of communism was created by the masterminds of the great conspiracy right in our own city of New York, I will cite the following historical fact. All records show that when Lenin and Trotsky engineered the capture of Russia, they operated as heads of the Bolsheviki party. Now, Bolshevism is a purely Russian word. The masterminds realized that Bolshevism could never be sold as an ideology to any but the Russian people. So in April 1918, Jacob Schiff dispatched Colonel House to Moscow with orders to Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin to change the name of their regime to the Communist Party and to adopt the Karl Marx Manifesto as the constitution of the Communist Party. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin obeyed. And that year of 1918 was when the Communist Party and the menace of communism came into being. All this is confirmed in Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 5th edition. In short, communism was created by the capitalists. Thus, until November 11, 1918, The entire fiendish plan of the conspirators worked perfectly. All the great nations, including the United States, were war-weary, devastated, mourning their dead. Peace was the great universal desire. Thus, when it was proposed by Wilson to set up a League of Nations to ensure peace, all the great nations, with no Russian Tsar to stand in their way, jumped on that bandwagon without even stopping to read the fine print in that insurance policy. That is all but one, the United States, the very one that Schiff and his co-conspirators least expected would balk. And that was their one fatal mistake in that early plot. You see, when Schiff planted Woodrow Wilson in the White House, the conspirators assumed that they had the United States in the proverbial bag. Wilson had been perfectly built up as a great humanitarian. He supposedly became established as a God-man with the American people. There was every reason for the conspirators to have believed that he would easily hornswoggle Congress into buying the League of Nations sight unseen, exactly as the Congress of 1945 bought the United Nations sight unseen. But there was one man in the Senate in 1918 who saw through that scheme, just as the Russian Tsar did in 1814. He was a man of great political stature, almost as great as that of Teddy Roosevelt, and fully as astute. He was highly respected and trusted by all members of both houses of Congress and by the American people. The name of that great and patriotic American was Henry Cabot Lodge, not the phony of today who called himself Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. until he was exposed. Lodge completely unmasked Wilson and kept the United States out of the League of Nations. Here it becomes of great interest to know the real reason for the Wilson League of Nations flop. As I previously stated, Schiff was sent to the United States to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1 and most important was to acquire complete control of the U.S. money system. Number 2, as outlined in the original Weishaupt Illuminati blueprint, he was to find the right kind of men to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into the highest offices in our federal government, our Congress, our U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies, such as the State Department, the Pentagon, the Treasury Department, etc. Number 3, destroy the unity of the American people by creating minority group strife throughout the nation, especially between the whites and blacks as outlined in Israel Cohen's book. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, with Christianity to be the chief target or victim. In addition, he was strongly reminded of the imperative directive in the Illuminati blueprint to achieve full control of all mass communications media, to be used to brainwash the people into believing and accepting all of the maneuverings of the great conspiracy. Schiff was warned that only control of the press, at that time our only mass communications media, would enable him to destroy the unity of the American people. Now then, Schiff and his co-conspirators did set up the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, in 1909. And in 1913, he set up the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith. Both were to create the necessary strife. But in the early years, the eveil operated very timidly, perhaps for fear of a pogrom-like action by an aroused and enraged American people. In addition, he, Schiff, was busy developing and infiltrating the stooges to serve in all high places in our Washington government, and in the job of acquiring control of our money system and the creation of the 16th Amendment. He also was very busy with the organizing of the plot for the takeover of Russia. In short, he was kept so busy with all those jobs that he completely overlooked the supreme job of acquiring complete control of our mass communications media. That oversight was the direct cause for Wilson's failure to lure the United States into the League of Nations, because when Wilson decided to go to the people to overcome the opposition of the Lodge-controlled Senate, despite despite his established but phony reputation as a great humanitarian, he found himself faced by a solidly united people and by a loyal press, whose only ideology was Americanism and the American way of life. At that time, due to the ineptness and ineffectiveness of both the ADL and the NAACP, there were no organized minority groups, no Negro problems, no so-called anti-Semitic problem to sway the people's thinking. There were no lefts, there were no rights, no prejudices for crafty exploitations. Thus, Wilson's League of Nation appeals fell on deaf ears. The control of the press was assigned to Rockefeller. Thus, Henry Luce, who recently died, was financed to set up a number of national magazines, among them Life, Time, Forbes,
I think most of they didn't hear all that. So this internet's being bounced again. Oh, yes. Netflix, as you can see. Now I'm live. Is bothered to come in because they reroute. So the darker code is real.
Mr. Rothschild, can you talk? Hey guys, how you doing? It's Steve again with the rest. Thanks so much for reading the blog and for subscribing to the free mailing list. You can do that for and of course, this mailing to get notified by email every time a new post is updated, usually a few times a week or sometimes, or just once every Saturday, which is all the most recent posts. So, one more thing. Thank you so much for everybody donating to help keep Roxy Tube, Roxy Cast, and Rodder News online. Roxy Tube is the YouTube alternative. Roxy Cast is the alternative. Check them out. Links at the bottom of this post below. And let's get to it. So this is going to be something that I feel that a lot of people, it's very important. It is very true. Whenever you hear the name or the word Illuminati, what do you think of? Conspiracy theory. It is very true. And the two richest families in the world, dating back to the 1700s, early 1700s, the Rothschilds, and the Rockefeller. I know you've heard of them. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers are worth trillions. And the video in this post is about an hour long, and it's highly recommended. Grab coffee, whatever beverage of choice, and watch and understand. This is all very true. You've heard of the Bilderberg Group. That is very true. Based in a nutshell, has been proven by ex-alphabet companies, CIA, FBI, high CIA intelligence. There's a video on it somewhere on RoxyTube where an ex-CIA older gentleman, retired, he's going around basically giving seminars to others. So that said, basically, watch this video. It's very important. It is true. And in a nutshell, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers control everything. Most people in politics are puppets, as are the ones in Hollywood. as are the pop stars. These pop stars, seen as idols, they are groomed to do the bidding of the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, which they're synonymous with the Illuminati. The Illuminati was dismantled a couple hundred years ago, but it is still very active in various groups within groups known as the Freemasons. You've heard of the Freemasons, Freemasonry. What is a Mason? There are hundreds and thousands of Masonic lodges around the world. You've seen them. I'm sure you've passed by them. A lot of them appear to be little shacks, little buildings, to larger buildings, much larger buildings. There's tons of websites. You could do a search for Freemason website. They'll never ask you to join. They will never come to your door and try and sell themselves. They want you to approach them. It says so on every website. Now, I've done a post on this. I'm going to have a very important link below on what the Freemasons are. I highly suggest you read it. It's a very good read, and it'll open your eyes to a lot. So, the banks, the Federal Reserve especially, is not part of the United States. The Federal Reserve controls all banks and the government. The Rockefellers and Rothschilds families control the Federal Reserve and basically everything else underneath them. They hold meetings every year in secret locations. Committee of 300, group of 300 people that basically calls the shots through the whole world. Now you might say, well, I know someone who is a Mason, or I know someone, or I did know someone who was a Freemason, or maybe you were a Freemason. They hold meetings in lodges nobody's allowed to attend, and you are never allowed to speak. Now you might say, well, I know someone who is a Mason, or I know someone, or I did know someone who was a Freemason, or maybe you were a Freemason. They hold meetings in lodges nobody's allowed to attend, and you are never allowed to speak about what's being talked about during these lodge meetings, okay? Now, all of these people all over the world, they are not really, they're not privy to the information that's, way above them. There are 33 levels of Freemasonry, and as you prove yourself and do their bidding, and you pass their tests, they, they take the best of the best, the ones they feel will rise to the top. Only 33 really know what's going on in the world, and I'm talking child trafficking, human trafficking, organ trafficking, everything bad, satanic, everything imaginable you can think of doesn't even the surface of what's really going on with these demons. Okay? So everybody below the level of 33, all these Masonic lodges that you may have passed by in your car, these people, they're just doing the little bidding of what the higher-ups are saying. They don't even know what they're doing. Okay? They might be tasked with some little menial things. It's not gonna. They have no idea what they're actually involved in. They have no idea the size of this cult and how deep it goes. Okay, so if you've talked to someone who is a Mason or was a Mason in the past, you're gonna get the same answer. I can't talk about it, or they're gonna say we were never involved in anything like that. Why do you think they're kept in the dark? Because someone is going to say something. Okay, this is highly orchestrated. The hierarchy goes really high, and the highest members of this cult know what's going on. They're the ones who are well aware of the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and even them, they don't know everything. That's why if you watch movies, okay, you're going to see the number 33 in a lot of places, and you've heard this said before. They are required by their sick and twisted rules to let us know what they do before they do it. Have you ever seen the Olympics of 2012, the opening ceremony, the creepy show? I saw it when it was on TV live with all these going around the big performance arena, and all the kids are covering under the bed sheets. There were hundreds of hospital beds with children under them as these demons were lurking around, people in black leotards, clothing, and hoods. And those signify the demons, symbolize the demons, the kids cowering, hospital beds. Well, don't you know, 8 years later, what do we have? The whole COVID hoax. Seriously. The number 33, be on the lookout for it. Also be on the lookout for pyramids. They have other symbols that they constantly put.
No, I won't play that because that's alleged. Keeping it on the subject of Freemasonry and the Illuminati. So, this is... Okay, they kept cutting out my audio, so I'll go back. Halfway through the audio.
Ladies and gentlemen, Frankfurt to Paris. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 Supreme Councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the third in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the World Revolution. Before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince at Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political Zionists. And here let it be noted that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, and other internationalist bankers, and that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish internationalist bankers at all. That slaughter was necessary necessary in order to create worldwide hatred of the German people and thus bring about the war against them.
Trying to send me a message won't
In
work with
short,
demons.
this Second World War was to be
Use it on
to
your
destroy
part.
Nazism and to increase the power of political Zionism so that the State of Israel could be established in Palestine. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies. The agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time, the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the near, middle, and far east is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to Mazzini on August 15, 1871. Pike stated, "Those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known." Quoting his own words, taken from the letter he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter is now catalogued in the British Museum in London, England, he said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism,
There you go.
both conquered and exterminated at the same time." When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the agents of the great conspiracy, but actually, they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy. The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayor Anselm, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers.
So also you've got period, the cover-up portraits can be dated back on the 12th century, but only a core group of 9 members of the Illuminati group, the Knights Templar, the military arm of Illuminati Secret Society, or proxy of SION, kicked out of the Crusades that lasted over a century and a half, and rivalry developed between the Knights Templar and the Zion when Jerusalem lost to Turks in 1187 and the century 1307. King France Paris the Fair, Illuminati, converted the wealth and was jealous of the Templars' power. A French king, being a puppet of the proxy, set out to arrest all the Templars in France on October 13th. While many Templars were seized and tortured, including the Grand Master, quotes who it is, many of these Templars, by being tipped off, escaped. They eventually resurfaced in Portugal and Malta as the Knights of Malta, and later in Scotland, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The acquisition of either greater wealth and natural resources, total political power and control over the others, are the motivating forces that drives the decisions of the Illuminati. The toll on human suffering and loss of innocent lives are non-issues for these individuals, who are aligned with very dark, fourth-dimensional beings, demonic entities. The demonic group of fourth dimension controlling and manipulating human Illuminati known, and it quotes, reptilians, the Pacific race, and all alien reptilians. I've seen a map actually detailing the extreme ancient history of formation of planet Earth with the planet 9 known as Nibiru, and the authenticity of those maps are real on a different social platform. I can't go into it now. Now, with the mind control, the depopulation program in the Illuminati, mind control individuals, and the biggest secret, and it goes into that the formulation of to create the undetectable total mind control. Now, a famous individual, well known, Kathy O'Brien, done a book in America, and Bruce Taylor, a female, no doubt up the levels of Illuminati in the rituals, satanic rituals, which usually include the unlawful loving of a certain age or a certain age group of individuals, the drinking of certain things I won't quote on here, of a certain nature, and the consuming of really demonic stuff of the body of a demonic nature, which I won't quote here. This is really is dark times, but light will always conquer over evil. So I only share the audio. 50 years ago, now this article is dated 1997, educateyourself.org, on this particular page, and they're deliberately are behind, and they block the internet connection. I think I do personally on this fiscal bit since. So let me just check. Yeah. Demons, Freemasons, history of Freemasons, and gaslighting. But nobody's watching because they're happy. They're just braces back, and they're just plot the next move. It's important to get faith, hidden hands of faith. So the Jews control the Vatican, the real spiritual controllers of the New World Order, Article 2006 as well. And I mean, all this, we're living at the end of times. The Black Pope controls all major decisions made by the Pope, and in turn controls of the Illuminati. It goes into details about how so you've got, I mean, there's so much evidence and documents out there to find, and people that are forced into doing the bidding of these control puppets for this bigger picture, and every time they sit in the world, and who's unlawfully targeting, singling out people that has integrity and not part of their plan. There's an article here, ever since 1738, Clement X II issued his bull against the depraved and perverted societies of Freemasons, and the Roman Catholic Church had been condemning Freemasonry as if it were the child of the devil. Ironically, it was only recent years as the Protestant churches were at last plucking up courage to round the Brotherhood that the Vatican softened its opposition and seemed almost to welcome its centuries-old enemy into the canopy of St. Peter's itself. The first more than 20 bulls against Freemasonry was issued partly on doctrinal grounds, but because in the 1730s it felt that the temporary power was being subdued by a lodge in France. I think that could be France, might be too. The lodge, set up by Englishmen, was being used by English agents as a cell for induced espionage, i.e. takeover. An ordinary membership or people getting together, it started off, until it got infiltrated. As I explained in chapter 33, there's a book here. The agent's target was Stuart Pentier James, who was holding the court in the Holy City, but the lodge also contained Italian freethinkers who mocked the papacy. On both the grounds, Clement railed against societies called Liberia, and it quotes, it's either Italian or French name, or Freemasons of the great mischiefs they did to the temporal tranquillity of the state. Since we are taught by the divine and word to watch like faithful servant night and day, lest these sort of men break as thieves into the house, and like foxes endeavour to roof up the vineyard. We do condemn the permit the same societies, and this is a long time ago, by the way. The Pope condemned that no members of the faithful in Christ, whatsoever the status, laymen, chairmen, should join Masonic societies, or give Masons shelter, or help them meet, afford them counsel, help or favour, or assist them to recruit, or in any manner aid and promote them. Of those who would suffer the penalty excommunication without any declaration from which no one can obtain the benefit of absolution from any other but us, except the point of death. Enforcing the new law fell to the Holy Inquisition, which promptly jailed an Italian member of the mentioned lodge. The lodge closed, but some of its members still conspire against Rome. For the next 100 years, Freemasonry grew throughout Italy as a cover for the nationalist revolutionary activity, and according to one Masonic writer, from the middle of the 19th century, the slanted point of Italian politics was war against the capitalism directly led by the lodges. By the year 1848, Pope IX and the Papal States were overwhelmed by the movement for Italian evisceration. The Papal Prime Minister was assassinated, an act which the revolution's leader, Mafia founder F.W. the Freemason, quotes that it was deemed necessary and just. That's what the Freemasons said. Assassinated the Prime Minister. Demonic, isn't it? Even far back as 1800s. The Mormon religion is based on Freemasonry. Joseph Eveil Smith, his family is riddled in history in USA in Freemasonry. Unfortunately, a lot of people that are already members don't want to look into that history. They don't question it. So they cast me out my own family because I dared to question. Rome rebelled. Somebody fled, and the Mazziniana set up Rome a republic. It did not last. In 1850, the French put Paris back on the Roman throne, but the secret societies signalled at the end of this territorial power. 20 years later, Italian unity was achieved, largely the efforts of these three Masons, the reverendary Mazzini, a soldier, a Gabak DI, and the statesman C.A. Correa. By the year 1870, these men destroyed the Pope's earthly domain. Rome was made the capital of an independent secular nation-state, and the papacy was reduced to 109 acres around St. Peter's. In this tortured 32-year reign, the Paps XIX issued 6 bulls attacking Masonry, but the definitive condemnation came in 1844 with Hermania Genius, in which Leo X III laminated that the pontificate was, I might pronounce the words wrong, was falsely deprived of temporal power and the stronghold of his rights and of his freedoms. He was next reduced to injurious condition unbearable for the numberless burdens, until it come to this that the Sanctilians may openly say that they had already in secret devised for a long time, namely, that the very spiritual power of the Pope ought to be taken away from the divine institution of Roman papacy, ought to disappear from the world. How demonic is that? Leo endorsed the view that the Freemasons' real supreme aim is to prosecute Christianity with untamed hatred, and they will never rest until they see cast to the ground all religious institutions established by the Pope. Masons insinuate themselves into the hearts of princes in order to exploit them as the compasses to overcome Christianity. Then they resolve to shake the foundations of thrones, persecute, criminate, banish those sovereigns who refuse to rule as they desire. The Masons deceive people into believing that that the Church is cause of the substitute and misery in which they are suffering, but it would be more according to civil wisdom, more necessary to universal welfare, prince of peoples instead of joining the Masons. Freemasons against the Church should unite with the Church to resist the Freemasons' attacks. The turning point was of the papacy of John XXI. In 1962, the Second Vatican Council promoted a new climate of religious tolerance. It raised hopes of coming together for all churches and faiths. It called for a dialogue for all men in goodwill, would show a readiness to talk with the Church. Leading Masons felt that this must include them, because of their order was built on a similar concept of gathering together beyond the limits of various religions and world views. Men of goodwill on the basis of humanistic values, comprehensible, acceptable to everyone. It was also told that Masonry and moral values encourage men to embrace their own religion even more strongly, so that Catholics who are Masons become even better Catholics. So it all changed. In the decade after Vatican II, Catholic leaders in several countries were solicited by Freemasons. In 1968, prominent English Mason Harry Carr persuaded the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster to propose a softer line of Freemasonry in the Vatican. Cardinal Heeman was sympathetic because of the sad tale of one of the parishioners in his book. He told of his visits to Yemen of the Guard, a beefeater of the Tower of London, who was over 70 and well-timed white beard. The man also attended Sunday Mosque, prayed with great recollection, but never took the communion. There were only one black mark in the Yemen's record. He had not received the sacraments within living memory. His children knew the reason. In the army, he had become a Freemason in the belief that the world future his career. Heeman felt it was probably only a matter of time before the general ban on Freemason would be lifted. But even he dared ask the Vatican to allow the Yemen to take communion while he was still a Mason. Instead, the Cardinal urged the beefeater to quit the craft, but he never did, because he was under the most certainty, the false impression that he would have to cease to be a Yemen if he resigned from his Masonic lodge. As it happens, the impression was almost certainty. Correct, for the craft is strong in the army. The tutorial in the army, many military organisations are rife with the Masons. At the time, it may have held sway among beefeaters. Irony. Such were the obstacles Heeman and Brown embraced Carr's view that regular Masons had never plotted against the Church, and accepted the need to draw a sharp line between English style Freemasonry and the anti-Christian ground by own type. In this book, Carr says he urged Herman to urge Rome that it could use English model to distinguish between good and bad Freemasonry. He added, "What we really need is an intermediary to convince your authorities." Herman replied, "I am your intermediary." The Canal then looked up the cause of regular Freemasonry with Pope Paul VI. By 1971, he was able to report some progress. Similar church masons were going on in France, where Freemasonry has ever stronger and declared traditions than in Italy. The French Revolution was largely inspired by Masonic notions and notions by Masons. So there's a whole list of the history, goes into quite detailed, and Britain, of course, all of the secrecy. It goes into a lot more connections in history with the Vatican. I mean, this is worldwide. Shocking state when the state membership list was discovered a month later. Magistrates have already been investigating Grandmation. You see, modern times now is infiltrated every aspect of life. You know, Inside the Brotherhood is a book out there going back 1989. You see, British Freemasonry distraction not invalid, but you see, when it takes over, like you heard the audio just now, and I'll play it offline in a moment, it's infiltrated everywhere in society and history, British intelligence, and all aspects of life. If you think you want to join to bet your career in life, think what you're doing. And if you're approached and don't think you've got any choice because you've just fallen on hard times and you really are United Grand Lodge of England as a symbol. The Brotherhood has a history going back 1700s, even further. Every part of life is infiltrated. So that's certain things. So I'm going to because they're definitely blocking things. Like, I'm screen share myself a little. Well, they're hacking this, the demons of Freemason gaslighting. I'm sharing the screen, but it's not being shared. Nobody's coming into the chat because they're blocking it. This is what they do, is just hack the internet. Or go off and start a new stream. So, Jewish, Illuminati, the secret societies. You should go to Roger.com. He has content. What is the deep state and the Illuminati? That's what it's done. The secret covenant and Illuminati surfaced on the web, and that's what the original audio video is of. Bloodlines in deep state go back centuries, 13 bloodline families apparently. And they control the world. I'm just seeing if this gets uploaded. Hidden site. It's not a conspiracy theory at all. Societies are real and very dangerous. They want you to believe that they don't exist. Would do anything to protect their secrets. That's why they're targeting me. Freemasons have been around for generations will have you believe they're about love and helping humanity. But the quite opposite is true. So you read the post below. Freemasonry is the secret society most heavily guarded secret in the history of the world. You may know Freemasonry by another name. Freemasons, Illuminati, Illuminated. It's a secret society of the rulers of the world. Deep. Since 1770, when the first Masonic Lodge was organised to overthrow Christianity, Satanism has crept into the news, media, entertainment, music and more. Freemasonry symbol is used in movies and news, politics, Hollywood. If you thought talent, connections are needed to succeed in Hollywood, music, politics, you're wrong. Those who are rich and famous are only there because they are allowed to be. Most famous people are nothing more than puppets of the upper level of Masons. Just like selling your soul to the devil. You obey, keep your secrets, participate in Santic rituals, you can go far. Masonic emblems. In centre with a G is the most recognised Masonic lodges, and I've always wondered why there's a G in my son's car. New car. He's been poured into it. It's the most recognised of Masonic lodges and hidden in plain sight in movies. George Washington, US President Walt Disney, Drake, Madonna, Johnny Depp, Rod Stewart, Taylor Swift, John Travolta, just a few. Thousands are all Freemasons. You need to belong to the secret society Freemasons, literally. You sell your soul to get the levels of stardom. But when you belong to them, you belong to them. X Factor winner quotes, reveals the world's secret, largest religion in a video, including in this post below, which I've already seen that one. The video by that individual is a little over 5 hours long and incredibly informative. Watch the entire video in parts at a time if you have to learn about Freemasons of the Illuminati. What the Freemason websites imply is the leading fraternity organisation in the world. Its origins lost in the unrecorded history of medieval times, but it formulated its organisation in England, London, 1717. Current world Freemason membership totals 3 million members, 1.1 million are Hemo North America, 75,000 Masons and 450 local lodges. Ontario has one of the largest Masonic members in any state in America country. There are over 6.000.0000 Masons throughout the world. As a fraternity organisation, Masons unite men of good character. Well, I don't think my neighbour number 2 is of good character at all. Who through of different religions, ethic or social backgrounds, share belief in the fatherhood of God and his brotherhood of mankind. That's what they claim. Taking a look at their website, Freemasons are all about brotherly love and the love of God and doing what's right for fellow man. It becomes across being a good brother for all. Freemasons before a secret meeting. Some Masons, Freemasons around the world have a different story to tell. The rabbit hole of Masons and the Illuminati is very deep, worth exploring. Don't be fooled by the Masonic innocence. Peaceful looking website. It's like a pyramid scheme. Pun intended. Non-pun intended. I guess, and you don't know what really goes on until you're deeply rooted in the high levels of the organisation. As you research Freemasonry, it's important to remember that there is a fine line between a cult and an organisation. It's important to remember the teachings of God. Remember the Bible says you don't need to know anything about the Bible to understand what this place will show you. Absolutely no outsiders are allowed to attend Masonic meetings, and nothing is discussed without anyone outside of the lodges. Let's cut to the chase. Freemasonry is Santism disguised, but after reading this post you need to decide for yourself as always. There's 33 degree levels, and beneath the 33 don't know what actually really goes on within except those at 33 degree level Illuminati. Jesus Christ was estimated to be 33 years of age when he died on the cross. And this is why Freemasons use the number 33 so much. It's mockery of Jesus Christ. Freemasons hate God, hate Jesus Christ and Christians. The number 33 is used by Freemasons quite a bit. A lot of their favourite numbers are part of their symbolism. Freemasonry is where truths are lied about, and lies are truth, where the dark becomes light and the light becomes dark, where you go to enter Satanism and a life of materialistic moral freedoms. This is where you go to lose yourself in self-indulgence and worship morals. You are taught to hate God and Jesus Christ and worship Satan for being cast from heaven. If Freemason says they do not worship Satan, remember that they just don't know. Only the top level knows the secrets. Any Mason below 33 will never know what really goes on in the secret society like a pyramid scheme. Only the ones at the top pull the slots, call the shots. I should know, I was married to one in 1994, and he was a master Mason. All Masons are sworn to secrecy and everything discussed. I got to know a few things about my ex-husband. He's not all those years ago. He's never ever was a nice man. New order planned from the beginning, you see. The secret society planned for the New World Order, designed by the Masons in the 1700s, 82, is laid out in order to see on the US dollar bill in 1932. Masons operate symbolism all around us. The post about the video, and it quotes again about an individual. You see, the size of masonry you'll never know. Well, I've seen it quite a lot, and I wish I hadn't. Notorious, I won't repeat that. So it goes in about famous Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling and translates to the New World Order of the Ages. That magic in it. So, you think you're going to get anywhere with anyone when you're being targeted with all these involved? That's why though, and more case all over again. Prayers and blessings always have been unlawfully targeted, and the bigger picture of advanced technology go on. That's it. I could waste some more time on this. Sharing information. So I'll stop screen sharing now. And I'll just put this in the background. So definitely sure. Alright, nobody comes in. It's hacked. So I shall end the stream.